I'm back with another episode of Off the Shelf. Today we're taking a look at Dave Hargrave's The Arduin Grimoire Volume 1 from 1977. Please stick around. I'm AZ Mountaineer, and this is our channel, Old School Rules, where we celebrate the community of old school gamers and grognards who like classic RPGs, miniatures, magazines, and everything that goes with it. The Off the Shelf series is an opportunity to share an item from my collection with the community. So whether this is something you've never heard of before or something you're not particularly familiar with, this is an opportunity to understand this item a little bit better. As I mentioned today, we're taking a look at one of the alternate rule sets that was created in the early days of Dungeons & Dragons. This is David Hargrave's The Arduin Grimoire Volume Number 1. I hope you enjoy the video. So in today's episode of Off the Shelf, I'm taking a look at a rule set book called The Arduin Grimoire Volume 1 by David A. Hargrave. It's first published in 1977. It comes in this sort of folio size. It's a heavy stock cover, and then pages sort of folded in half and stapled through, two staples through the middle. It's quite thick. It's about 90 some pages long, I think, in all. Let's see, yeah, 94 pages, not counting the covers. Dave Hargrave was playing the original Dungeons & Dragons game. They were out in California, where a couple of different groups had developed some pretty well-known early sort of variant rule sets. You remember there's another video I've done on the Balboa Game Company talking about the Warlock rules that were published there. It's a different group that was out there in California. But Dave Hargrave is probably the most famous. The Arduin setting, there's actually 8 books that were produced of rules for this setting during his lifetime, and there's some additional material that was released after he passed away. In addition to the rule books themselves, there are additional things that he put out. He put out some cards with magic items. He also partnered up with Dragon Tree Press for the publication of some of his books. He had 4 adventures or dungeons, are called the Arduin Dungeons, box sets, separate rule books. So quite a lot of stuff was published in connection with Arduin. Like I said, probably one of the most famous sort of and substantial alternate rule sets that was ever produced for in connection with Dungeons & Dragons. As you might imagine, this is often the case. The folks at TSR got a little surly when they saw this stuff and told him to stop. They sent one of their famous cease and desist orders. The Apocrypha is that he wasn't too happy about that. He went into the booklets that he had printed. He's like, I'm not reprinting these things. He got white out. He just whited over, I think, the words Dungeons and Dragons in there and wrote in something like, fantasy role-playing game or something in its place. He doesn't mention Dungeons and Dragons in the version of this that I have, I don't believe, unless I missed it. But it very clearly is inspired by that. A lot of his rules sort of replace rules that were in Dungeons and Dragons, box set of rules that have been released. And as he says, this is really the result of a lot of playtesting in his local group. And bottom line, he says he thinks these rules are good. You should feel free to use whatever you feel like using. You should feel free to make up your own stuff. In his foreword to the edition, he says, the supplement is offered in the hopes it will infuse new life into the amateur side of fantasy role-playing games and stimulate the free idea exchange so sorely needed to keep this type of gaming alive and visible. It's so true 50 years later, almost 50 years later, as it was the day it was written. I really love all the old stuff that was put out at this time period, and so much of it inspires me to think about how we can make our gaming hobby better even today. Another special thing about the early Arduin book, this particular printing, is that a little-known artist named Erol Otus provides all the artwork in this book. And at the end of this video, I will focus in on the artwork that's in the book. He talks a little bit at the very beginning about how to play the game, just for someone who maybe doesn't know about, starts off with the idea you're going to travel, overland. You might have some encounters. You're going to get where you're going, which may be ruins and maybe a dungeon. And you'll go through, you'll have some combat, you'll try to recover things, and your characters get better over time. Here's the cover. You can see even at this early stage, Erol Otus's art has got this fantastical theme to it. Just blow this up a little bit. You can, I feel like the creature certainly feels like something that he would have done, and the style of his fighter here at the beginning, you can sort of see some of the stylized work that's so famously a part of his art. Now, this was the first printing cover. They replaced not only the cover but all of the art in this book when they do their later printings of this. It goes through several printings, and so now we have a different artist here on the front. And you'll see this scene on the front. There's the woman, there's a fighter there, and then there's this insectoid. And in his campaign, there are all kinds of different races or types of characters you can have beyond those that are sort of token-esque or typical to D&D. There's a little bit of controversy about this because the back cover is the post-fight view, and the lady apparently does not only does she not wear armor, she doesn't wear anything on her top, and so she's naked. And so they replaced that after one printing with a version of her wearing essentially a little bikini top there. So as I mentioned, this comes out in '77. David Hargrave is the publisher. He's the author of the rule set. There's no price printed on the actual booklet. It's about 94 pages. And as I mentioned, Erol Otus is the artist of the version that I have, which is the original printing. I also have a later printing, I don't know, third, fourth printing of this book, which has different art in it. Greg Espinoza, who does the cover and the later printings, and then Michio Okimura does some of the interior illustrations as well. I don't have any of their art in this video. I'll probably do some follow-up videos not only of other Arduin books, but also to talk specifically about some of the really interesting parts about the rule set that deserve some more time, because this is just going to cover the entire rule set to give you an idea of what the heck is Arduin Grimoire. So as you can see, this is my table of contents. Later printings, I think, had an index, but not a table of contents per se. So this just sort of takes you in order. I'm not going to talk about this stuff here because I am going to go through in quite a bit of detail here in the video and look at almost all of the stuff. But if you guys want, you can pause it. But tell you what, I'll get out of the way so you can read it. And then I will pause this. I will make it so you guys can pause this video if you want to just take a look at the table of contents. All right, so let's dive into the material. So the very first thing he talks about in here is the experience points, and this is his experience point system. He absolutely says no experience points for treasure. Treasure is its own reward. I give you experience points for accomplishing things, and here his little chart goes from 50 to 400. 400 points, guess what gets you that? Death. If you're revived, reincarnated, something like that, or curse and changed into a completely different type of entity. For whatever reason, that's the most experience point heavy thing you can do. Going down the list, being the only survivor, acquiring a great artifact, defeating a demigod or major demon in single combat, defeating in single combat a creature against great odds, so like 4 times your hit dice or whatever. Down through acquiring stuff, casting spells, using items, all the way to the very bottom where it's like figuring out a trap, taking a little damage, using a very low-powered spell, etc. So it's interesting to me that taking damage, or just the normal things you would do in combat, or in a dungeon, he's just giving out experience points for basically using your skills, I guess is the right way to say that. His experience point system is very similar to what's in Dungeons and Dragons. He has a lot of different character classes, which we'll talk about in a moment. But basically, he's just got these charts, and you go down through, getting more and more experience. And he goes way up, to like 100 levels, I believe. He also has what he calls so he has the typical races: human, elf, half elf, gnome, dwarf, hobbits. But he also has all kinds of other options here, which he very much says you could be. You can be a troll or an ogre or a giant or a titan. You're going to adjust your campaign accordingly, but he encourages you to do all those type of things. He also has the typical level cap concept in here, and so he's got a whole chart. What type of character, meaning what we would say race, are you, and then what type of character class do you want to pick, and then there's some where you can't have, some where there's limits, some there's no limits. So he deals with all that in here. He also deals with things like attribute limitations. So different races essentially have different attribute minimums and maximums they can have, just like in D&D. He has a chart in here to give you starting height, starting weight for your character. And then he's got these notes on fantastical beings where he just tells you a little bit about what these different type of characters would typically be like. He deals with alignment in a slightly different way. You can roll for your alignment. Everything, again, he uses the concept lawful good down to chaotic evil, but then also has amoral, evil, and insane as an option. Later on, I'll mention he has a page where he talks a little bit about concept of alignment. He has some things to think about here. It's basically how likely is someone of this alignment to go along with killing somebody, lying, being tolerant of other people, being loyal, being cruel. That's kind of how he thinks his way through alignment. The next thing he has are special abilities. And if you watch any of my videos on fanzines, this idea that once you set up your character, you get some type of a chart where you roll something particular about your character. What some people have, like personality traits, special abilities like extra keen eyesight or hearing, extra good at maybe a mage gets an extra spell, a warrior is extra good with a particular type of weapon. Hargrave's got that concept here. He's got different charts for different character classes. So like here we've got fighters, and there's all kinds of different bonuses you can get with weapons. He's got different things here, like maybe you were a sailor. You've got bonuses against different types of encounters or creatures, and also just some potential backstory stuff in there as well. And he's got one here more tuned to magic users. This one's for bards, singers, witch hunters, paladins, and more religious type people, he says. Here's one for monks, thieves, ninjas, highwaymen, corsairs, assassins, traders, slavers, rangers, those who have more of a secretive nature to their character. Technos, normals, which is his word for just people who don't have a class, sages, courtesans, and anyone else. Okay, so mentioning those things, let's talk a little bit about his character classes. So he has the typical character classes that you're probably familiar with. Warriors, which is his name for fighters, clerics, mages, magic users, druids, illusionists. He also has rangers and paladins, bards or singers. He uses those interchangeably, and monks. So those are all right. We're used to those. But then he has some other character classes that you might decide you'd like to try out. The first one here is called the trader or merchant. Not particularly fun. I mean, basically, its advantage is exactly what you would think it would, which doesn't lend itself very much to adventuring. The psychic, who's sort of like a clairvoyant. They can foresee things. The barbarian, which we know later becomes a class in Dungeons and Dragons. And his barbarian is the kind that goes a little berserk in combat, including the risk of not calming down after the enemies are dead and continuing to attack whoever's nearby, including party members. He has the Rune Weaver, which is a type of mage, but instead of sort of fast-acting magic that we're used to, they have to weave these intricate runes. And so they have different types of magic, but it takes them a long period of time to sort of set everything up to weave their runes. Technos do not believe, so this maybe wouldn't fit in your world. You can clearly see, I think Hargrave's world, like many early worlds, had a bit of a sci-fi or a post-sci-fi, post-technology element. So the techno is someone who completely doesn't like magic, doesn't at all, and relies on technology. So they're more of a, they're not like a tinkerer like in D&D. That was sort of a gnome specific idea, right? But they're more of a tinkerer and have some particular skills for that. There's a medicine man, which is like a priest mage, druid combo, a witch hunter, I think, which is inspired by Michael Moorcock, who has a famous, I think, witch hunter in some of his, named Cain, in some of his novels. I think that's kind of where it comes from. So he's got several new character classes. They're all okay. I think, just something different to play with. He's got the typical chart here, buy your goods for different amounts. He talks about his theories of magic. He had somewhat more of a mana-based spell system than the Vancian magic that's in Dungeons and Dragons. And he talks about that. He talks about all kinds of different things here related to how magic works and people's attitudes towards magic in the game. When it comes to another similar item, which is turning of undead, he just has a different, he has his own chart, but essentially he's got the same concept there. A cleric type can roll, you beat the roll, you turn away or destroy the undead. He has a unique chart here that he doesn't explain very much, so I'm just sort of guessing if I've got this, because I should say this whole book is a bunch of charts. So unlike the Dungeon Master's Guide, where there's just words, pages of text and then some charts interspersed, most of Hargrave's book is charts. And so it's sort of like either he knew what he was doing or he thought you knew what you were doing, and he doesn't give you a whole lot of explanation of what these charts are, how they work. Again, it's not written to be a completely standalone. He assumes you understand how to play Dungeons and Dragons before you get his book, I think. Okay, so he's got this detect ability chart. So he's got the class down the left, and then he's got things that you might be able to detect: poison, evil, magic, masked magic, curses, disease, hidden injury, alignment, weather, enemies, and undead. And then it comes down again: treasure, mechanical traps, magical traps, secret doors, invisible objects, gates, true sight, or other. And so he gives you a base level here, and then he says at the bottom, for each level, different classes get different percentage increases. And so everybody's got sort of a natural ability to detect certain things if they're, I would think, if they're investigating, not just sort of walking past them. And then he has saving throws, a concept we're all very familiar with. The only thing I think so it's all pretty much the same. Here's what's interesting. Here are his saving throw categories: dragon breath, psychic attack, polymorph, disintegrate, stoning, which I think is petrification, paralysis, poison, venom, acid, spoken spells, rods or wands, stabs or separate, and something else. So he's got saving throws there like that. And also he's got not only for your class, but also for items like magic armor, rings, glass, spellbooks, stuff like that. Here's how he does magic weapons, which is, I think, is a really good approach. It's very simple, and yet it works really well. So he's got columns you roll repeatedly. So the first column you roll D100, what type of weapon is it? Then you roll D100, how many pluses? Then you roll D100 damage bonuses, to hit plus, and then damage bonus. Then you roll again. What's the intelligence? You roll again, ego. You roll again for normal powers. And it's normal powers, you get 1 for every 2 intelligence levels over, and then he has an asterisk. So I don't know what that is. I'm guessing 10 or 12, but he doesn't say. Then special attributes, you get 1 for every 3 levels of intelligence over 12. To the extent both intelligence and ego are over 12. For every 3 levels, you get another one. And then he's got, I don't think it says there, and then he also has a chart at the bottom if you want to roll for alignment. Again, very simple. Unlike D&D and his concept, any type of weapon can have any sort of special effect, and so it's all sort of, can interplay like that. He has this really interesting thing about prismatic walls, which he says are really common. I've never heard of the concept before. And basically he tells you that he has a chart with the color of the wall, and then what it would do if you walk through it. Some of them stop certain type of things, right? So only missiles, only certain type of spells, only certain type of creatures. And then again, what happens if you different effects that go through it, and then a type of spell you can cast on it that will cause it to basically fizzle out. And every type of wall has a different spell that would cause it to fizzle out. Then he has a whole section, as you might imagine, here of new spells, and he's got new spells for every character class, and those are really good. Probably better covered in another video because they're worth the specific discussion. Likewise, he has new magical treasures in here. Again, in both cases, given what he has, both how many, but also they're not that many, so it sort of makes me feel like he expects these to augment rather than be the only magic items or the only spells in the game, right? Then he has a whole section here, as you might imagine anyone would, on combat. And so he's got this concept of attack modifications. He uses like a hex-based system based on where the attacker is. This looks a little complex to me. I mean, I get it. It's realistic. It makes sense. I don't know if I like it in the sense of trying to resolve combat. He's got all these charts. He's got everything. He's got actually 4 pages of charts like this. He has the weapon, the type of armor it's against, and he's got, you know, sort of modifications for that. Then he's got his main combat table. Again, armor class concept down the left. Roll across the your levels across the top, and then what you would need to roll to do it. And then at the bottom, he explains what, much like in D&D, you know, he's like, this is your type of armor, this is what your armor class would be. So that's a very similar concept. Let me go back. So he also has a critical hit table and a fumble table, and they're both good concepts. Might be worth a longer video to talk about his combat, but anyway, he's got a very good. I mean, most of us have fumble tables. Either just a fumble is an automatic, you know, weapon breaks, weapon dropped. He's got a whole list here of things you roll on a D100 of what might happen. Anything from just basically a bad attack to, you know, weapon gets twisted around, drops, breaks, hit the wrong person, fall down. You get hit accidentally by getting, you know, you put yourself in the way of somebody else's attack, hit the wrong person, critically hit somebody nearby, you know, and he's got damage that goes with it. He also has a section here on brawling, and so he's got, you know, what are you trying to do? Right cross, uppercut, straight hit, kicks, flying kicks, you know, and what's the other guy trying to do in response? It's a very detailed unarmed combat section. Then he has a section of different type of creatures. So we've got were creatures, dinosaurs, sea creatures, all very, let me go back for that for a second. It's very typical, right? I mean, 2 pages of dinosaurs. I mean, his sea creatures are basically giant sharks, giant lobster, giant crabs, types of whales, giant clams, etc. So, just very typical. He's got these encounter charts. I'll get myself out of the way for a second. And so you see his encounter charts here for, like everyone did at the time, the dungeon. The deeper the level, the harder the monster you might encounter. And so you basically, if you have an random encounter, you roll a d20, and it tells you what type of creature, and then how many, you know, one to whatever is the number that you would tend to encounter. And he takes this all the way up through the 12th level of a dungeon. He also has some outdoor encounters. Those were for in the dungeon. These are outdoor encounter tables, and just like later in the Dungeon Master's Guide, he basically says, where's the encounter? Mountains, desert, sea, forest, jungle, swamp, snow. And then based on that, there's a D100 random chart for you to roll. He's got a lot of detail in here, and you know, weather's not unimportant, but he's got 2 pages here where he talks about whether you roll, what time of day it is, and that will influence the roll. You know, it's more likely to be sunny in the summertime than it is in the winter, which, you know, that does of course make perfect sense. All right. He's got this again, some random areas he decided to focus on with his charts. Random fog and mist generation chart for dungeon rooms. And I think this is, if you've decided you want to put this in here, then, you know, here's a chart to use, right? So you roll for the color, the smell, the visibility, whether it comes with some type of sound, and whether it has any type of effect on you when you go inside. Then he has some random traps, floor traps, ceiling traps, anything from holes in there to creatures, mechanical traps, random rays that are going to have effects on you, etc., etc. Then he has the most malignant and malefic miseries known, and most of these are in swamps, some in mountains, deserts, and forests. and it's basically some type of weird disease, I guess you would say. And he has fancy names for them, and then he has symptoms that you would be afflicted with if these things got you. And then he's got his list of new monsters, and like I said, these are really good, but I think the kind of thing they deserve their own video, so I'll probably do that at a separate point in time. And then finally in the back he's got what he calls his demon lore, which are some discussions about different types of demons, and then also the 21 layers of hell that he goes through, very particularly what type of creatures in each of those. Also has some lesser demons in there. And then I didn't have a photograph, I should have mentioned. At the very back he's got a very simple hand-drawn map of like an outdoor map with some different little towns on it, and then he's got a simple dungeon in there for you to use to show you what that looks like. All right. So we're going to take a look at the art of Erol Otus. A reminder, this is only in this first printing. When it comes out with the second version with a different cover, all of his art is redacted and replaced for whatever reason. This is the art from the first page. I don't know what this spider-like creature is with the four-clawed mandible in the front, but it's pretty fearsome. Looks like it's got a scorpion stinger's tail. Then this one is called, there's some words here, I don't know if you can read, called Lost and Alone. It's just a little figure in a cavern. It's dated 1976. This is called the Dread Vampusa, and it's got its little javelin and knife. It's got a skull-like head with Medusa's snake hair. This is a half-orc. He looks like he's got a really big head. This one is called A Mage Strikes Back. And if you notice, so the mage is down on a prone position up against a rock to the right-hand side of the drawing, and he's shooting a magical blast at this demon, I'm guessing demon because it's horned, a creature, and it hits it in the face as it's coming at him. This one is called Orc and Minotaur, and you've got the orc on the left with the shield and the sword, and the Minotaur, and I'm pretty sure he's holding up a battle axe, but it's just at an angle so that you see the blades in an odd way. This one is called Stalking Vroat, and the Vroat is a creature, a new monster that's in that section of the rules. This one is called the Boogeyman. This is the Turvan, like Wyvern, but with a T, I guess. This three-headed creature. This one is called Demon versus Rock Dragon. So the demon's coming down at the top and the rock dragon's there at the bottom. And this one is not titled, but whatever this creature is, it looks like it's ripped the heart or just really ripped up the chest of this fighter that's got held with its left hand, and it's tearing him up with the right. So I think that guy is toast. And then finally, this is the rear cover to the Arduin Grimoire #1, and this one is called Homeward Bound. It's a guy, and he's riding like a dragon type of creature. Okay, that's a quick look at the Arduin Grimoire, David Hargrave's first of 8 books of alternative rules and information about his game that he plays. Again, a variant, if you will, of Dungeons and Dragons. This comes from 1977. He continues to produce these up through the 80s. I have all of those, so maybe I'll take a look and read through some more of those and do others. Probably the first thing I'll do if I come back to Arduin is actually take a good look at the monsters in there, because I always like new monsters. Take a look at the new spells, the new magic items, and do a slightly deeper dive to talk about those. Hope you guys are enjoying the videos from our channel. I hope you're enjoying this series and the other series. We've got a series on fanzines, on art, the artists, close look at the art of different artists from the early days of TSR, as well as this off-the-shelf series where we look at different type of products that are adjacent, if you will, to Dungeons & Dragons. That's it for this version of Off the Shelf. Until next time, my friends, keep rolling 20s.